Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Back out here on a Sunday night and ready to party. So I don't know if you guys have heard this or not, but the world's falling apart. And amongst all of the insane bits of news all around the world, one of the spookiest things right now is Google. That's not the word that I use, that's the word that Yahoo Finance used. Google's new AI spooks investors, sending gaming stocks into a freefall. This actually happened on Friday right before the market closed for the weekend. I was just casually sitting at my desk doing my thing, and then all of a sudden I started getting some notifications about the Nintendo stock moving. Now obviously I am very invested in the Nintendo stock, not literally in the sense of financially invested, but more of along the lines that I know it's always worth following Nintendo stock value because Nintendo operates in a way to please their shareholders, so you can kind of get a feel of when and what kind of announcements might be coming soon depending on how those prices are swinging. So when I started getting those notifications, the only time I ever get notifications like that is when there's a public statement about Nintendo's sales. I'm like, oh, they must have leaked something to Bloomberg. Something about how high their sales numbers are going to be in time for their shareholder meeting on Monday in the middle of the night Eastern time. But no, I was actually surprised to see that the share value just kind of dropped pretty heavily. Like it went from 1612 to 1532 US dollars. And it closed off the day at a 5.41% loss. Turns out, robots are making video games now. That's a thing, or at least we're on our way there. Now, we already kind of knew that a lot of video game companies are moving more towards using generative AI to make video games. But Google released this presentation, and it just kind of freaked everybody out. It's like, oh, there's no point in following any of these companies anymore because we know that the AI is going to take over inevitably, and Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, all of them are basically screwed. Or at least that's what the investors think. And I don't know, maybe it's true. But what I do know is a lot of people came right to the forefront to discuss these drops in prices. And obviously because of the circles that I am in and because of the areas I get my news from, I start to see patterns of people suggesting that Nintendo investors are idiots. Because here's what happens, right? Google releases this video, and you can completely correct me if I'm wrong about this, but this is what I understand. The video kind of takes information from YouTube videos that make video game videos. How many times did I just say videos there? And the AI basically recreates those type of games again. So it's like a new game, but it's kind of based off of games that existed already, and people started messing around with it and releasing videos, and like you saw like, I don't know, Mario and Elden Ring knockoffs. I can't share any footage because a lot of this stuff got copyright hit. But anyway, so the idea here was like investors saw that the AI was making these games and they're like, oh, we're there now. It's over. Everybody just pull out. But then, you know, the Nintendo fans popped up and they're like, you idiots, why would you sell your stock at Nintendo? Like, that's going to make Nintendo lose money. And you're so dumb. They can't recreate the magic that the Nintendo companies make. Do you just think that gamers are going to be buying slop from now on? Which, okay, it's not quite AI slop, but considering either the first or second best-selling game currently on the Nintendo Switch 2 is Pokemon Legends ZA, I don't know if Nintendo fans exactly have room to talk right now. We are pretty sure that people will buy slop. That's without a doubt. But even then, that's besides the point. See, what happens is, when the investors see that the AI is able to create this type of game, it's not about what's made now, it's about what's coming soon. And what's coming soon is probably not good. Put it this way, if this continues in this same trajectory, you're going to pray for the days where the worst AI that you would complain about was sad Mario thumbnails. Because this is kind of how it starts. Actually, this is further along than how it starts. It already started. This is just the next major step. Like, if you think back to when we were getting those fake Will Smith videos of him, like, with the fingers that bent the wrong way and he was eating spaghetti and it was like an AI video, that was very early on and to what now we have as, like, the entirely fake movies that are being made. I would argue right now with what we just saw from Google's AI showcase that in the gaming world, we are further along than Will Smith eating spaghetti with his fingers bending the wrong way. And I don't like it, but I think the investors realize that. They're like, oh, this is an inevitability. Now, in fairness, there's also like bubbles bursting, allegedly, and data centers are being shut down. I obviously have to be a little bit discreet on this, but in the industry that I work in, there are projects for data centers that are being pulled away. Civil site development projects. I think people are getting laid off right now because there's not enough work for them. So there might actually be some truth to the bubble somewhat bursting, or it might just be the shifting in the projects that are being made. I don't know. But the technology is getting scary close, and it just kind of depends on where and when this pops up. So, quite frankly, I don't think the investors are being stupid. I think they're being proactive. They're being pretty smart. And in fact, this is one of the smartest things they've done. We've seen how volatile Nintendo is. And the same investors that were buying into Nintendo through the last 3 years of the Switch 1's life while it was increasing were also very smart. They were definitely not investing because they thought that the Nintendo Switch 2 was going to be something groundbreaking and change the world. They were investing because there was a lot of hype around the Nintendo Switch 2, and anytime news about it came up, it was just popular. Like before they even knew that the name was going to be Nintendo Switch 2. They spent like 2 years just being like, oh, the sequel console, the next big Nintendo release. And everybody's like, hey, hype, woo, click, buy, 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 buy. And the only people that genuinely thought that the investors were being smart, as in they were like investing in Nintendo long-term for the idea of like quality or something, were basically Nintendo fans. Nobody else really thought that. Everybody was like, oh, the investors are just buying into the hype because they see the number going up, and eventually the console's out, they're going to be going back down, and that's exactly what's happening. And it's volatile as hell. Like, it goes up, and then it drops downwards, and then Nintendo releases another press release about the non-sales, and they jump back in, but then it just falls back down again because, like, there's no major Nintendo Direct that announces a 3D Mario game or a Zelda game or Smash Brothers. And then if they wanted to stay in there, all of a sudden RAM prices are going up, there's an AI situation. Whatever the case is, clearly the Nintendo stock is a little insane. The funny thing is, I would argue if you're going to be buying Nintendo stock, you'd probably want to buy it today, as in Monday morning when it opens up, or at least before the market closes, because on Tuesday, it's probably going to get a bump with the new quarterlies. But obviously, don't do that because I suggested it, because I'm just an idiot online talking into a microphone. And I would feel really bad if you lost a lot of money because of me. But anyway, the investors that bought into Nintendo for like 2 or 3 years as it was rising and breaking new record by record, month after month, leading up to the hype and the wait for the Nintendo Switch 2, I think they were very smart, but I interpret it as people that were investing in money. I don't think they cared too much about Nintendo or the product. They were just like, word, people are still talking about this? Let's keep buying, let's get more money in there. And then, the RAM price situation happens. Everybody takes a hit, but Nintendo takes one of the harder hits. And then right now, the AI thing with Google, everybody took a hit, but Nintendo took one of the harder hits. It's because it's overcorrecting now, just in the same way that it got pumped up additionally that it didn't need to in the first place. But I do not think that these investors are dumb. I think they know exactly what they're doing, and they're going to buy right before it jumps up again. But what I will say is that I don't actually think this is an indication of Nintendo failing. I think it is funny that this stock value has gone down with all of the hype and the animosity towards Nintendo increasing. And it's interesting to see how the pattern of the Switch 2 kind of follows the trajectory after the launch, where it just kind of kept rising up with the hype. And it was like the hype plus the stock was always lined up, and it peaked right in mid-August. And then like we get a Kirby Direct and Dragon Drive released in mid-August, and then it just like keeps going downwards. Then you get like a little bump with the Direct, and I've gone through this already, but basically like it just kept dropping downwards, and it's like, it feels like with the hype, the stock market moves. But obviously, a lot of that is a coincidence. Some of it is not, because press releases do affect the hype, and they do affect the stock value. But the stock market is not necessarily an indication of whether or not a company is failing or succeeding. A big reason why I even bring it up in my videos is because, back in August, one of the counterpoints that I would get from Nintendo White Knights coming into my channel was that I was insane for thinking that the Switch 2 was going to be struggling through the end of the year, and especially when the holidays come around, which is exactly what ended up happening. November and December were both 35 to 40% lower than what the Switch 1 did. But when I was suggesting that back in August, people were showing up into my channel and commenting. Many of them were YouTubers. And they were like, oh, I don't know how this guy can think that the Switch 2 is not going to do great when the stock is at an all-time high. And I was like, where are these people getting this information from? I've never heard Nintendo fans talk about the Switch 2 stock. And lo and behold, they were all getting their information from like Twitter, where some guy was like, hey, the investor confidence in Nintendo is at an all-time high. And this guy's just like a fan, by the way. He's not like an analyst or anything. And I'm like, oh, you guys think that the price of the shares of Nintendo is an indication that the investors have confidence in Nintendo? Do you think that's how the stock market works? The only thing that means is that they have confidence in the share value, and the share value does not always equal quality for the gamers. And then, of course, that led to me making a bunch of videos over the past few months about the share value, because that peak has not been seen since, and it's gone the opposite way. In fact, now we are officially at the point, or at least fairly close to it, where the current stock price is pretty close to what it was back in January prior to the Switch 2 reveal. So confidence from the investors really came and went pretty quickly. Obviously, like I said, I think it'll bounce back tomorrow whenever the quarterlies come out. But just like we saw in September, when it jumped up a little bit, it didn't go back as high, and it didn't last anywhere near as long. And then after it did that little jump upwards, it went downwards even more, and then now it's dropped down significantly more. So yeah, if Nintendo fans think that investors are stupid, they only think that because it negatively affects Nintendo. and their shareholder value. Because for whatever reason, they did not think that the investors were stupid back in August when we had nothing but a partner direct when everybody wanted a regular direct, and Drag and Drive was like the big release of August. And all of the goodwill and all of the hype that was built up through the launch of the Switch 2 was kind of just passing away because people were like, we bought this thing and what are we supposed to play now? Actually, it's funny because I remember back then, August and September was very slow for Nintendo channels in general. And that's a big part of the reason why so many other channels started to comment on my videos, because they were like, we need some kind of content, we need some kind of engagement. Because, when there's nothing to talk about Nintendo, everybody's views go down. The pro-Nintendo, the anti-Nintendo, everything. It's like, you got nothing to talk about with Nintendo anymore. So they come to me in hopes that it leads to something, but obviously it didn't. But I don't think it's a coincidence that through this past January, and very likely it's going to continue into February because the next direct is supposed to be a partner direct, that there are a lot more channels talking about me again and a lot more special guests showing up in my comment sections. Because once again, just like back in August and then the following September after that, there was really not much to talk about as far as Nintendo circles are concerned. Third-party videos just don't really cut it in the Nintendo circles. Not usually. Every now and then one will make an exception. And it's obvious why. Nobody really cares about third parties when it comes to Nintendo consoles. So likewise, Nintendo fans on YouTube do not care that much about third-party content. And actually, interestingly enough, even the videos that I've made about third-party sales on my channel have performed worse than anything related to first-party. So even on like the hate side of things, I make a video about third-party sales struggling, and that video doesn't do as well as my other videos where I talk about Nintendo struggling, because everybody's like, well, it's a third-party game on a Nintendo console, Nintendo. We're not really here for that type of content. But yeah, I thought that was a funny observation, and I think it's going to be interesting to see a repeated pattern through the end of February where we get an announcement for like the Pokemon Day Direct. In any case, from August until now, the stock value continued to drop downwards. So the investors, I think, were very smart to know exactly when they needed to make the money, and they were very smart to know exactly when they needed to pull out. And I'm not saying that to like glaze investors. Like, I don't really care about people that are in the stock market making money. In fact, I think the world is a significantly worse place because of the stock market and share values, and all the hobbies that we've ever enjoyed have been destroyed because of this kind of stuff. But I just think it's a very funny observation that Nintendo fans are out there calling these investors idiots, where 6 months ago they were like talking about how they were geniuses because, their confidence in Nintendo was at an all-time high, and it was an indication of the Switch 2's upcoming success. But, as with everything else in the Nintendo discourse, it's only favorable of them to use when it fits their narrative. So now that the prices are going downwards, you would think they'd be like, oh yeah, the investors no longer have confidence in the Nintendo success, because before it was at all-time high, and now it's been trending downwards for months. There may be external factors that are making them lose this confidence, but you'd think that they would have that kind of conclusion. But no, it's just, they're idiots. They don't understand that this AI video doesn't actually mean that they can make a full game that's better than a first-party title. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the investors are more worried about what this means for the future of these companies. And rightly so. And also, kind of on the note of the discussion about shifting narratives, this is something completely unrelated to the actual topic of this video, but we're 13 minutes in, so if you got your information for Google AI, I'm not really going to talk about that anymore. You can move on from there if you'd like. Recently, I have been seeing more and more Nintendo fans talk about how the holidays for the Nintendo Switch 2 were actually not that bad. They're specifically talking about the States, but this is applicable to all of Europe because it was the same patterns in the States as Europe. So the idea that they're all trying to talk about now is they're like, I don't understand why there's so much negativity towards the holiday sales for the Switch 2. In actuality, a lot of the sales that happen in the holidays were expected to be a bit lower than what you would have seen with the Switch 1 years because the economy's bad and because the price of the console is weak. And most importantly, because a lot of the holiday sales that would have happened in December ended up happening earlier in the year in June, July, and August. Strictly because of all the consoles that were available. And this was actually an article also done by IGN. And I've specifically had people quote this article and send it to me, as if it was a way to laugh at me, because like, oh, even IGN says it was a good holiday. First off, usually whenever something comes up from IGN, it's shrugged off immediately. But, if it's praising Nintendo, they gotta grasp onto it a little bit stronger. Secondly, every single thing in this article is exactly what I had been saying the entire year. I have videos on this. The first thing I said was that the economy is bad and the Switch 2 is going to be too expensive for it. And everybody told me that it was going to be just fine and fastest selling console in the first month and 2 months. And it's probably going to break records every single month along the way. And the holidays is going to be even better. It's going to break even more records back then. And I kept saying, hey, it's like, it pulled the holiday sales forward and people laughed at me and they're like, oh, his idiot thinks that they're buying their Switch 2 for Christmas on August. And I'm like, that's not what pulling demand forward means, but okay. Then I kept telling people that it was going to be a very top-heavy launch, and we were going to see one of the worst holidays that we've ever seen with this console because of all the availability from earlier on, as well as a lack of a good first-party title. And then now they're sitting there and they're turning around and telling me, obviously the holidays were not that well because it didn't have a very good first-party title for Christmas. And I'm like, yeah, I was saying that for months. I was saying Kirby and Metroid, these weren't the games that were going to do a good holiday season, and y'all kept arguing against me. That, this applies to everything. Even when the console launched and I was like, yo, this thing's going to be in stock. And they're like, no, it's going to be impossible to grab. It was in stock. And I was like, yo, this thing's going to get a discount soon because scalpers aren't making any money on it. And it's still sitting on shelves and not selling enough. And they're like, no, you're an idiot. It's just sitting on shelves because Nintendo provided around a lot of units. And then it ended up getting discounts and started moving off shelves a little bit quicker in December than it did in November, which it was still a bad December because it was still 35 to 40% lower than what the Switch 1 saw in its December, as well as every other December, not just the 2017 one, every single Switch December. This was like the worst December that we've seen in a decade almost for Nintendo. But they all were like, oh no, the consoles dropped in price because they're trying to be a loss leader. And then exactly what I said happened. It actually had a very terrible holiday season, and that's why the prices went down. And basically, I'm very confused right now because everything that I've been saying was going to happen with this console since it launched has pretty much come exactly as I had expected, but somehow it keeps getting spun as if this is what they were suggesting all along and not me, right? Like am I crazy? I mean, okay, I know I'm a little crazy, but like, am I that crazy? Did I not tell everybody that the Switch 2 was going to have a poor holiday season? Like, did I not tell everybody that? And my indication was like, it's going to be bad, especially in comparison to the Switch in 2017, and it's not going to sell as many units as the Switch did in 2017. Like, everything that's going on in this IGN article is exactly what I've been saying was going to happen. But I was getting pushback prior to it happening, and then after it happened, they're like, see, I told you what happened. Now, I was the one that was saying it, dude. Anyway, yeah, my whole point is like the whole narrative shifting, goalpost moving, Switch 2 failing situation has been very entertaining. I don't know if you guys are enjoying it as much as I am, but this has been so fun. It's been insane to be a part of this discussion, and weirdly enjoyable to appreciate it from front row seats. Like, genuinely, I still remember, prior to the launch of the Switch 2, I thought the console was going to come out, and it was just going to be out of stock for like an entire year, which like everybody thought, and we wouldn't be able to analyze anything properly, because the entire discussion would have been about like how much more would it sell if it actually had units available at launch. And then, like, we'd get to the holiday season and we'd finally find out exactly how much the thing actually sells because of the holiday season. But this has been a lot more fun. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as much as I have. Mostly because I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. It's gonna get busy around here when the quarterlies come around, so it's not for the faint of heart. But yeah, I think the observation of human patterns when it comes to obsession with corporations, specifically greedy ones that gaslight and manipulate people's emotions, mostly related to nostalgia, while at that same time getting help from like all of these different categories of clients or journalists that have a actual legitimate stake in the success of these corporations. I don't know, I find this fascinating. Almost as much as I find the actual data around the sales of the Switch fascinating. And it's just been an excellent discussion with all of the crappy things going on around the world. Especially because, honestly, the comment sections here are usually phenomenal. I mean, there's like 3 or 4 bad eggs that show up with every single video almost. But like I put out a video, I get 1,000 comments. Almost 90% of them are overwhelmingly positive. And then in between like the dialogue that I see, which is very interesting to keep up with, there's always somebody, at least a few people per video I should say, that shares like a very long, heartfelt, almost like journal entry about their experience with Nintendo and the console and, whether or not they actually bought the Switch 2, whether they're going to buy the Switch 2, how they feel about Nintendo and all that time. And they're always like very nice and respectful. Normally I don't necessarily reply to those comments. I don't reply to a lot of comments, obviously. But I always read those ones and I always heart them. And it's pretty cool because sometimes like when I'm just on my phone and I got nothing to do, I just open up the comments section, I start scrolling through the ones that I haven't seen yet. Genuinely entertaining. And then every now and then, like one of the usual haters around here pop up and I reply to them just because it makes them happy too. You gotta give everybody a little bit of attention sometimes. Okay, sorry, now I'm just being a jerk for no reason. All right, I'm gonna close the mic now before I get myself in trouble. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.